Mr. Valet, you testified a short while ago that you were able to see the persons who were taken into police custody during near the whole scene of this incident. Do you remember that? Yes, sir. Were you asked by any police officer to make an identification? No, sir. On those persons? No, sir. Were you asked by any of the witnesses or any of the other people involved in the incident to make such an identification? No, sir. Where were those two people standing or seated at the time that you saw them while they were in police custody? Well, I was parked on the side of the car, and they were standing on the front of the car, right next to the other side. So they were outside the car? Yes, sir. Mr. Valet, you have testified that in People 6, that's there before you, that you were shown those series of photographs by Officer Wire. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Would you look through that set of photographs and pick out for me the photographs that would depict Mr. Taveras, the gentleman seated 2 seats from the bar? This one looks more like him. You are referring to photograph number 7 in People's Exhibit 6? Yes, sir. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Mr. Valet, would you please look at the gentleman seated next to the swinging doors and the green sweater? That's him. This is a picture of him, right? Yes, sir. And so that photograph is not of Mr. Taveras here, is it? Yes, sir. So you think that might have been the other photograph that you picked out for Officer Wire, is that correct? Yes, sir. And did you tell Officer Wire anything about the person depicted in that photograph, what he did that evening? I just told him they were running over that hill. Did you tell him that he might have been the second one? Yes, sir, I thought he was the second man. Mr. Valet, when you had an opportunity to see Mr. Taveras stand up, this was outside the hearing of the jury, and Mr. Patrick asked you a series of questions, and you hesitated for a number of minutes, and your statement was, well, I think it could be him, but I'm not positive. Now, that was the second man. Do you remember all of that circumstance? Yes, sir. You also remember Mr. Patrick stating for the record, talking to the court, Your Honor, may the record show that the witness has identified Frank Taveras. Do you remember that? Yes, sir. And are you telling me that the fact that you were drawn to, strike that, are you telling me that after you heard the name Taveras as the name of the person that you picked out tentatively, that name didn't help you one bit when you came here today and pointed him out without any hesitation as the man that was the second one coming over the hill? Objection as argumentative, Your Honor. Well, I'm not sure that the question is completely clear. Do you understand the question? No, sir. All right, restate it. Mr. Valet, Mr. Patrick identified the second gentleman as being Frank Taveras on that occasion. Do you remember that? Yes, sir. Well, now, you say that you do remember that he identified him as Frank Taveras, but you just said a little while ago that you couldn't remember what the name of the second gentleman was. Do you remember that? No, sir. Well, sir, I am very bad at names. Now, that's the whole thing. You could tell me your name today and ask me tomorrow, and I won't remember it. Unless people are my friends, I just don't remember names. So the fact that he was identified by the name didn't help you one bit today in identifying him here before the jury. Is that correct? No, sir. We have a double negative. I don't think the record correctly reflects what the witness intended to say. You mean that it did not help you, or it did? No, Your Honor, it did not help you? No, sir. All right. No further questions, Your Honor. Mr. Wood, Mr. Valet, what is your testimony now concerning the gentleman in the green sweater, second from the end? Can you identify him as one of the persons who was at the beach the night of the fight? No, sir. It is your testimony then that you are not able to pick out the man wearing the green sweater as being one of the persons at the beach the night of the fight? No, sir. That is all, Your Honor. May the record show the reference was to the defendant Meza? It may, sir. It is my understanding that about a week after this whole thing occurred, Officer Wire came and showed you the pictures? Yes, sir. He showed you the pictures in Exhibit 6, is that correct? Yes, sir. And at that time, you identified picture number 2 to be one of those that you saw coming over the hill? Yes, sir. And out of the presence of the jury, you identified that picture as being a likeness of Mr. Daniel Harrow, the man on the end. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And do you still so identify it? Yes, sir. May the record show that picture number 2 of Exhibit 6 is a picture of Mr. Harrow. Is that correct, Mr. Patrick? Yes. All right. The record may so show. I have no more cross, Your Honor. Very well. Sir? Thank you, Your Honor. One brief question. Mr. Valet, having in mind all that you did from the time that you first saw the 3 cars drive up to the beach that particular morning until you then saw all the individuals come over the hill and leave in those 3 cars, what is your best estimate of the length of time that that took place? About 10-15 minutes. Now, at one point, you earlier gave this 10 or 15 minutes, and I thought that this was until you came across the woman who was coming up the beach. I'd say about 20 minutes then. All right. So now you would say that from the time that the cars first arrived and you saw the individuals get out until you then saw all the individuals get into the car and leave, you now say this would be closer to 20 minutes. Is this correct? Yes, sir. Excuse me? Yes, sir. I wonder, Mr. Valet, if you could give us a description, please, of what your friend, Mr. Hoffman, looks like. He's got something like a broom, and it is almost blonde, brownish blonde. He has green and blue eyes. He's 5'6" and a half, weighs about 125 pounds, and he's not completely white. He is something like red. It looks like he has a suntan all the time. Ruddy complexion? Yes, sir. Does he wear any type of glasses? No, I never saw them. Does he have any hair on his face that you know of, like a mustache, beard? No, sir. Does he have any sideburns? No, sir, he can't. Does he speak Spanish? No, sir. No further questions. Redirect, Mr. Patrick. Just a couple of questions, Your Honor. Earlier in your testimony, I think there was some reference to the heavy-set man or something, some word like that. When you are referring to the heavy-set man, who were you referring to? Daniel Harrow, indicating the individual at the bar at the end here. Is that right? Yes, sir. Now, do you recall that you were asked by him concerning photograph number 2 here, and you stated that to your recollection, you had identified that photograph as being a photograph of the person who was the heavy-set person of the 2 persons at the beach. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And you stated that you believe that to be a photograph of the individual at the end, Daniel Harrow. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I wonder if we could have the defendant, Ray Harrow, and the defendant, Daniel Harrow, stand for a moment, Your Honor. Very well. Looking at those 2 individuals, of whom would you say photograph number 2 is a picture of? Now, the man in the white shirt. The man with the white shirt? Yes, sir. May the record show the witness has indicated the defendant, Ray Harrow? Yes, you may sit down, sir. Referring to the defendant, Ray Harrow, in the white shirt, what is your best recollection as to whether or not he is the person coming over the hill, speaking the words you indicated? Would you repeat that again, please? Now, Miss Edmondson, this man that you say pointed a gun at you while you were in the driver's seat, was he standing on the driver's side of the vehicle? Yes, he was. Did he point the gun at any particular area? Yes, at my head. How far away from your head was the gun? It was about that close. May the record indicate she held her fingers up, possibly maybe a quarter of an inch, Your Honor. Yes, the record will so reflect. What happened then after this man on the driver's side pointed the gun at your head? In the manner that you indicated, he asked me where my handbag was 3 times, and the 3rd time he told me, he said, "You better tell me where your bag is or I'll blow your brains out." Now, at this time, was your friend, Susan Alvarez, still seated in the passenger side of the front seat? Yes, she was. This man who approached your vehicle, how tall was he? Just approximately, I don't know, because he was bending down. This man who approached your vehicle in the parking area near your home, had you ever seen him before? No, I hadn't. Was he familiar in any respect to the man who had talked to you at Casey's Landing? Yes, but he didn't have a hat on when he came over to the car. They looked to you to be the same two people? Yes. Now are you a little bit upset at this time? Yes, I am. Would you like a glass of water? Please. Do you want to take a recess? Do you want to stop for a while now? No. I want to get this over with. Shall I proceed, Your Honor? Okay. Now, after this person came to the driver's side, your side, and asked you for your handbag 3 times, did you say anything? Yes, I told him 3 times that it was on the floor in the back. What happened then, ma'am, after the 3rd time? He opened the back door and got in the car and got my purse. Now, I would like you, Miss Edmondson, to look around the courtroom if you would, please, ma'am, and tell me if you can say whether this man that was in your car in front of your home is present today in the courtroom. Yes, sir. Would you point him out, please? Right there. For the record, she has indicated the defendant. The record will so reflect. Do you know or can you tell me if the defendant removed your handbag from the car at that time? Yes. He did? Yes. Then you said that another person that is not present today in the courtroom is the one who ran and grabbed the handbag? Yes. Did you see what the defendant did with your handbag? Yes, he threw it on the ground out of the window. Where on the ground in relationship to your vehicle? By the back door, on the passenger side. Did you observe whether he had opened your handbag or not before he threw it down? No, I didn't. At that time, did Susan Alvarez get out of your vehicle? Yes, because the guy asked her to get out. That would be the defendant. And when I say the defendant, you understand that I am referring to the man you previously pointed to? Yes, I do. What happened then? He went to search her, and Susan went running across the street screaming for help. Now you say that he went to search her. Who is that, ma'am? The defendant. The defendant seated here? Uh-huh. Now what did he do when you say that he went to search her? What did the defendant do? He was frisking her like a policeman would. Did the defendant put his hands on Susan's neck like he wanted to choke her? Yes, he did. And then after the defendant started to put his hands on Susan's neck, is that when she started to run? Yes, she broke away from him and started running. And was she saying anything as she was running? Yes, she was hollering help. And did something happen while she was running? Yes, the one that grabbed my handbag off the ground, went running across the street and hit Susan on the head and knocked her down. Now, you indicated he knocked Susan down. How did he do this? With his fist. And Susan fell to the ground? Yes. What happened then? Then he shot her once. As he was going away, he looked over at me and shot her the 2nd time. About how far was this man with the gun from you at the time that he shot Susan? About 30 feet away.
Please excuse the interruption.
Take that button now.
That's what I asked her to. She said she would.
Cut the wire.
That's what I'm thinking.
Really, there's,
We
I don't
don't want
think
that on tape. All right, let's try this one. Read the question. The answer may go out. Answer the question. I can't very well answer it, Your Honor, if Your Honor please, because the various conversations, all right, were so conflicting. Mrs. Delaney can direct you to it, I am sure. If you can't answer it, just tell her. Well, did Mrs. Arrington talk to you on or about February 15, 1991, concerning an alleged suicide attempt by her daughter? She did. And what did she say at that time? She said that her daughter, several days before, had attempted to commit suicide, that she was in a coma for 3 days in the hospital. I inquired about the nature of it, what was the cause in her opinion, and she stated that she wasn't sure whether it was Robert having gone to prison or the fact that Nancy, the daughter of Barbara, was involved in some sort of a situation with a foreign student at Indiana State University. I see. Did she ask you to do anything concerning this attempted suicide? Yes. She asked if I would spend some time with Nancy. that she felt that her daughter was a very tenacious person, and that she was bound to resume the attempt, and since we spoke the same language, we, referring to Barbara and I, that possibly I could deter Nancy. Did you, in response to that request, visit with Nancy? I believe that she called at the office within the hour. Did you see her after that particular time? What particular time, counsel? After the conversation that Mrs. Arrington had with you that you have just recited, did you see Nancy immediately thereafter? Within the hour, I see. And did you talk to her about this? I did. Now, from that time on until on or about April 16, you had many conversations with Nancy. Is that correct? That is correct. And she would go into her emotional problems and troubles with you. Is that right? That is correct. Now, during this time, did she discuss with you an idea of a little personal advertising service business or something like that? She did. And did you give her any advice or help on that? I did. Now, did you offer her the use of Premier Productions for this business? That is correct. Yes, I did. What did you offer her? In an attempt to keep the expenses down and the amount of capital necessary for it, I supplied her with a mailing address, a phone service, a business license, making it unnecessary for a business license, and leaving her the principal expense, that of the deposit with the city of Indianapolis for a business permit. Counselor, let's clarify a few things. Did you offer the use of the telephone? Yes, I mentioned that, Your Honor. And the typewriters? Oh, yes. What about a desk? Yes, and that too. And did she take advantage of this offer? She did. What did she cease and desist in that arrangement? Well, I never personally talked to Nancy after April 16. I still forwarded mail to her, approximately sometime up into May, but I had no personal contact with her. Well, now you mentioned, for example, this People's Exhibit number 4 for identification came in a manila envelope. Was that the usual practice, that she would forward you an envelope and you would forward mail to her? No, that was unusual. If it was an urgent phone message, I would call her service in Fort Wayne and have them relay it to her. And that way she would get it within 15 minutes. Otherwise, I would simply tuck the mail into an envelope and mail it to her. This was the first occasion where she supplied me with a manila envelope. And did you ever meet with Robert Wells? Yes, I have met him, yes. When? On the 5th of July was the first occasion that I ever saw Robert Wells. And that was the occasion of the interrogation in the Indianapolis Precinct Station House number 2. Is that right? That is correct. Had you ever seen him before that? I had not. Had you ever talked to him on the telephone? Yes. And what occasion was that? He called asking for Barbara to inform her that he had backed into one of the tenants' cars and damaged it the night before. I would guess it to be in late March or early April. I see. And how did you happen to talk to him on the phone? I believe Sally, my wife, answered the phone and handed it to me. When I ascertained it was for Barbara, he asked if Barbara was there. I handed it to her. Outside of that occasion, had you ever talked to anyone who you knew or understood to be Robert Wells on the telephone? I had not. Ready? Starts with question by defense. I understand you were out at a beach party yourself that night. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And you say you were giving that party with some friends? The friends were actually giving the party. I was just involved in it more or less. I thought you said you picked up the beer and the wood and that type of... I went with the man who was running the party to pick this up. Yes. Who was the person that was actually giving the party? Lou Haskins. And were these all personal friends of his who were at the party? Yes. Mr. Haskins owns a bar, doesn't he, in Imperial Beach? Yes, sir. Was the party being given for the patrons of his bar? I would say friends and personnel that he does know through the bar itself. Yes. And do you frequent his bar there? Oh, not frequently, as you would call it, maybe once or twice a month. And as I recall, you said there was a 16-gallon keg of beer out there. Is that right? Yes, sir. Now, your recollection is you got out there about 8:30 at night. I would say roughly in that area, yes. But you don't recall when this incident occurred? I don't recall the exact times, no. Well, Do you have an estimate as to when the incident occurred? Well, like I stated, it seemed only possibly 2 or 3 hours later, but it was longer than that. Was it after midnight? What? Do you mean from the time I thought about it then, or what? No, excuse me. Was the incident you observed taking place out there after midnight? Yes. You are sure of that? Yes. From what I know now, yes. At the time, I didn't know. I believe you testified on direct examination that you had gone out to the beach party at about 8:30 and you hadn't left that area. Is that correct? I hadn't left the beach area, yes. I'm sorry. I don't understand where you were when you first saw or heard something going on. Were you actually south of where this incident took place? No. In other words, you were north of where the incident took place? Yes. That would be between the fire where the incident took place and the apartment houses that appear in Exhibit 21. I believe that you identified earlier. That appears to be an aerial view of the area? Yes. And how far was your fire from this fire where the incident took place? I'd say anywhere from 1/4 of a mile to a 1/2 mile. All right. Now, was your fire near those apartment houses? No. It wasn't? No. It was, well, I would say about 100 yards from the end, 100 to 150 yards to the end of the road there that leads down along there. All right. Now, when you talk about the road, are you talking about a dirt road? Yes, sir. That kind of ends in a parking area? Yes, sir. This road to the right here. Looking at Exhibit 21 then, you are pointing to what appears to be a dirt road running down the east side of the peninsula. Is that correct? And would you say then that your fire was about 100 or 150 yards north of the end of that road? Yes, sir, I would say approximately. And anywhere from 1/4 to a 1/2 a mile to where the actual incident took place? I would think in this general area, yes. Excuse me, Your Honor. For the record, that is Exhibit 17. I'm sorry, I have been talking about the wrong exhibit. Could the record reflect we have been talking about Exhibit 17, Your Honor, the aerial photograph? Yes, it is Exhibit 17. Do I understand then that you and the person that you were with had walked some distance from your own fire before you heard this going on? Is that correct? Yes, sir. And you had walked in a southerly direction? Well, out to the water's edge and then more or less south? Yes. Now, were you standing by the fishermen when you heard this commotion? Probably about 5-6 feet from them? Yes. So you were watching the person fish at that time? Yes. How did you happen to know that he was catching a big fish? Well, somebody ran up to the campfire and said that he was. Somebody had ran past the campfire. So then you went on down there to see what he caught. Did you see what he caught? No. Did he have a fish at that time? He was still reeling one in when we got down there. In other words, he had a couple of smaller ones that he had already caught. About how far was it from the spot where you were to the campfire where this incident took place that you observed? I thought I just stated approximately about 1/4 to a 1/2 a mile. I'm sorry. I thought that was from your fire to the fire where the incident took place. Isn't that what you just said? Did I? I mean the spot where you were standing with the fishermen to where the incident took place. Oh, maybe 60, 70 yards, I don't know. All right. Now that would be about half the distance or more of a football field or something like that. I'd say something like that, yes. Could you see some people standing up on the bank? Yes, sir. What kind of lighting was there out there that night? Oh, other than the campfire lights, just the lights reflecting from the city itself, more or less from that direction. In other words, there were some lights from the city. Are you talking about Imperial Beach, or what city are you talking about? Well, I mean, they all lit up. You could see Tijuana and everything. I mean, all of the background would light up with that. Were these lights illuminating the area that you were in? In saying this, what do you mean? Brightly or, well, I asked you what lighting there was, Mr. Thornock, and you indicated that there was some campfires and some lights from the city. Well, I mean, you could see lights in the background that were more or less halfway. With reference to these lights in the background, I take it those were the lights from the city that you were talking about? Yes, sir. Were those lights illuminating the area around the beach there? Well, that would be kind of hard to say, really. I mean, you could, in other words, you could see people standing on the beach during this, but you couldn't. Now, could you also at that same time, Mr. Thornock, see people seated around the fire? Yes, sir. Or were they standing up? There were some standing and a couple sitting down. What was your next movement then? Well, after things had actually started, then I started to run towards the fire. About how long do you think it took you to get to the fire? Probably maybe 4 or 5 minutes, if that long. After you got up to the fire, were all these people that you saw on the bank there? What? Do you mean all in that one area? Yes. No, they more or less were filing off, going more or less north. Did you see people running north? Yes. Where were they in reference to the bank? Well, they were, going up across I think it would be the rocks, going across the rocks and running over that way. But you indicated that there was a lot of fighting going on when you got up to the fire, is that correct? Well, I said I'd seen a lot of fighting. I didn't say there was a lot going on at that time. In other words, it was just more or less the end of it. When did you see the fighting then, sir? I misunderstood you. When it started and on my way running up there. And so, when you got to the fire, was any fighting going on? Yes, just the bitter end of it. What did you observe going on? Well, just a couple of people swinging at each other. Now that's about it. Where were these people? They would be, let's make a reference. It is awkward for you to answer where the people with reference to the fire, just up above the fire from the beach. Now, when you say up above, do you mean they were up above the bank? No, I mean, how would you, east of the fire then? Let's put it that way. Fine, so you saw people fighting between the fire ring and the bank of rocks? Yes. And how many people were there? You mean how many people were left? How many people did you see fighting between the bank of rocks and the fire ring? It would be hard to estimate, maybe 5 or 6. Did you, I take it then, that is when you jumped over the fire ring, is that correct? Yes, sir. And the fire burning at that time? Very low, yes. When you say very low, do you have any estimate as to how high the fire was burning? In other words, how high the flames were? Yes, maybe a foot, foot and a half in flame height. And after you jumped over the fire ring, you were confronted by the person you have identified here as Daniel Harrow. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And he took a swing at you? Yes, sir. And then he ran away. Did you see where he ran to? There was an affirmative nod to the question, and then he ran away. All right, go ahead. And then, did he run away? Yes, in the direction to where the rest of the people were running. Did you see the other people running at that point? At that point after that, I more or less turned around to see what I could do to help the people that were laying on the ground. Was there any other fighting in the general area? As to when? After you saw this person run away from you, was there any other fighting that you observed in the general area around the campfire? After this person had ran away? Yes, no. Was there any fighting up on the bank east of the campfire? Well, I don't know if it would be a fight or not, but I could hear Jerry running, screaming and running around and trying to catch them.